Hi everybody, Rob here from Pro Studios, and welcome to this video tutorial where I'm going to answer a question I get an awful lot, which is about mixing materials or mixing elements of materials. Now there are different ways of doing this, probably tens of different ways of doing this, and basically what people want to do, or what I get asked a lot, is how do you add kind of localized different materials. So you might have kind of worn edges on a cube, or you might have some damage, or apply kind of like bullet hits or moss growing on a rock, all of those kind of things. And there are different ways of doing it. You could apply multiple materials to one object and then mask them using various different things. There are surfaces and effects and shaders you could use, or you could use height maps and all sorts of different tools and tricks. But I'm going to show you my favorite way, which uses just one single material, so it keeps everything neat and organized, and is quite a versatile way of doing things. So first of all, I'm going to take this cube, which is a 10 segment by 10 segment, and I've put it in a sub-D object here. So I'm going to select polygon or edge, an element of the cube. Doesn't matter what, and I'm just going to start with this corner. You could do a big selection here and select all the bits you want to be a separate material, but I'm just going to hit Shift C, and I'm going to say set vertex weight, and when the pop-up comes up here I'm going to put 100 and just hit OK. Now this doesn't look all that great at the moment, but what I'm going to do is if I double click on the vertex map itself, I go into vertex painting mode, and excuse the kind of quality of display here. I'm on a MacBook rather than a big high-powered machine. I'm going to take the radius of my tool down a little bit, and I'm just going to paint in some values here. So I'm just going to go along the edges. In fact, let me just turn off that subdivision, makes life a bit easier. I'm going to increase the strength to say 61, and you can see that I'm just adding in. In fact, let's increase this a bit more, and if I put this to add rather than smooth, you'll see I'll now get much stronger result. So I'm painting along the edges, paint along these edges here. So I'm going to have this, like this particular corner of the cube might have been exposed to the elements and has just taken a bit of damage. And one thing to bear in mind is when you're working with vertex maps like this, you will have resolution based on the underlying geometry. So if you want to increase your resolution of the map here, then I would suggest increasing the resolution of your geometry. You don't have to, it's all down to the object you're working with and the desired result. So I'm just having a few little gaps in my wear and tear here, and I'm not going to do anything overly fancy or special. I just want to show the technique here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reduce my strength down to about half, and I'm going to go back to smooth mode, and I'm just going to increase my brush size a bit just so I can smooth this out. So I'm just going to tap in here. Now I don't want this too smooth because I'm actually going to use this technique to create the bump for this material as well. So some kind of rough edges might be quite good. Okay, so that's fine. I'm pretty happy with that. It doesn't have to be any fancier. I might just blend out this bit here though. This is purely about showing you the technique, not about making a pretty render. Okay, so that's my vertex map done. I can get rid of that, and you can see the object is still as it is. I will just very quickly do a quick render, just so you can compare the scene before it's got any materials on it. And I've got no materials on any of the geometry, just the HDR on the sky. So you can see, pretty boring, which is okay. So now I'm going to turn on the sub-Ds, just round off the edges, and I'm going to create a new material. I'm just going to apply that to my cube, like so. And if I open this up, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off color. I don't need that. I'm going to do everything within the reflectance channel. First of all, I'm going to delete that specular, and I'm going to add a GGX, and I'm going to have a little bit of roughness in here. And I think the reflection strength is all fine. I'm not going to do too much to this. This is just my underlying metal. So imagine a metal cube with some kind of like damaged paint on top of it. That's what we're aiming for. I am going to have a little Fresnel on here because it won't look like metal without it. Again, I'm not going to go too fancy into details here. I am going to increase the IOR of that, and that's fine. That's all I need for this material. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go add, and I'm going to add a Lambert on top here. So let's just rename these to metal and paint. Just always a good idea to keep your layers organized. I'm going to go to the layer sampling here, and I'm just going to increase this to maybe about 5.5, 6. That'll do. Okay, let's give this a nice bright color so that we can see what we're doing, and then go for a strongish but darker reddy purple color. Okay, that will do. So you can now see that this has been applied, and if I do a quick render of this, you'll see that all we have is just a kind of flat red, which is not going to be overly pretty, and it's not going to show any of the wear yet. So how do we get from having the solid red cube to having one where the paint's being worn away based on our map and our selections? Well, it's pretty easy. First of all, I'm probably going to add a bit of Fresnel to this shiny, well, this the currently flat red paint, just to give it a little bit more realism. And then we'll go in and we will use a layer mask to define where the red is applied to our geometry. You can already see that adding some materials to this has slowed down the render quite substantially, and that's mostly because this is an older laptop, but also because I'm running screen capture and everything. So apologies for the wait. We should be pretty quick now. Here we go. Okay, so it's a nice enough red cube sitting in on a pale grey floor, and that is not at all what we want, but it's always worth just showing you the kind of steps, I think, when I'm trying to do training. So let's go into layer. Actually, let's do the Fresnel first. We'll add some conductor here, and I'm actually going to reduce the strength of this substantially. I'm going to probably bring this down to around 80, maybe even less. Let's go for about 9, and this is just to give it a bit of a sheen. So you can close that down again, go into layer mask, and what I'm going to add here, and there are multiple ways of doing this, and you could use different shaders to define where this paint goes. You could do just a really simple, let's just go to surfaces, and you could have checkerboard, and you will just have squares of paint applied, and you can see how that's happening here, and that's fine, but obviously not what we want. So I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to go into effects, and you can see here vertex map. Now you could use a fusion, or you could use like weathering, all sorts of things, a terrain mask if you want this to go height ways, so it's like top to bottom. But having a vertex map is useful because you can animate it and you can paint it. And I like using vertex maps mostly because you can paint them without having to UV an object. So if you want to keep things really basic and simple, this is quite a quick way of doing it. So let's just move this out of the way. You can see we've got a field here for vertex map. So I'm just going to drag that in there. If I remember right, I think we'll probably have to invert this. And I will just hit render, and I'll pause the video while that renders out. Okay, so here you can see that the paint is, you've just been removed from the edges that we selected when painted in with the vertex map. Still doesn't look quite right. So what we can do is, if we go to the reflectance channel, click on the layer mask shader that we set up, and if we just copy that channel, go into bump, and just paste that in there. I'll probably increase it a little bit. We'll play with that if we need to, and I'll just do another render, and this should show something a little bit more realistic again. Okay, so there you have it. It's already looks a bit better. Now again, this is a low res basic geometry kind of boring option, but it shows you the power of using vertex maps. It's a really basic, simple way of setting things up, but you only need one material. You really only need one channel, unless you're going to start adding other things. But also copying the channel from the reflectance for the mask into the bump channel means that should you, let's just do this so I can show you, should we go back into this vertex map, let's just say we'll damage the whole of the top a little bit more. So I'm just going to go back to add, and decrease the size of this. Let's increase the hardness a little bit, and I'm just going to add in a few more areas here. So this is going to be far more damaged than it was before. Just add a little bit here, and you could say, well, someone's scrawled, and you can see I'm using my trackpad to draw this because it looks awful, but I'm just going to put an R in there, so someone might have scratched. So if you're doing like a car with some graffiti or damage on it, someone keyed the bonnet, you could paint this all in a vertex map. There's no need to use any kind of fancy UVing, and I know a lot of you are not particularly confident with UVs, so let's do this. And now, because we're using a vertex map, when we re-render this, we will see that the bump follows along because we're not having to repaint any bump maps. We're not using a shader that then doesn't match up, where we're combining the two based off this one vertex map, and we get a really good result. And there you go. So one simple change to one map flows through to various different shaders. And of course you can do the same trick with all kinds of things. You could have light emitting areas, all sorts of things. But I wanted to show you just really the simple way of using one map, one vertex map, quickly painted or selected. And you could do that using edges. If you wanted to just have worn edges, using this technique, you could just do loop selects around the different edges of the object, and use the set vertex weight, and that's all done. And that would take you all of about 30 seconds to set up a worn cube, instead of this one where I just kind of came in and doodled really badly. So yeah, thanks for stopping by. If this has been of any use, please let me know. Like, subscribe, all that stuff, and look out for more coming soon. And if you have a question about how to do something in Cinema 4D, or whatever software you're using, let me know, and I'll see if I can do a video for that too. Thanks very much. I've been Rob. Bye bye.